Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here. And guys, I'm very excited for the conversation we have today because, as you guys know, I have a book coming out in about a month, and I have been diving into this world. And let me tell you, like, if you aren't prepared, if you don't know the right way to write, if you don't know the right way to get connected, you are so at effect. So I'm so excited for the guests we have with us today. We have Robin Colucci with us, who is going to tell us everything we need to know about writing a book, connecting with the right people, and writing a book that
Thank you so
matters.
much
So
for having
Robin,
me,
thank you for hanging
Jeremy.
out
I'm
with me
very
today.
excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, so you actually have a very interesting background, which involves a little fitness and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'd like to find out, like, how did you get
Yeah,
into
it
this
is.
this whole
It's
publishing
funny
world?
because it was kind of like a river that seemed like it was going one direction and then it made a hard turn and went fully circular, right? So, right.
As life
And it
often
is
does, by the way.
interesting because when I reflect back on it, I realized that every single element was essential, right, to my being able to
Mm.
do what I do today and at the level that I do. And so, and I always like to say that because I think sometimes when we're in it, we just think we're lost. I mean, I know I had a lot of those moments, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, one of the tough things as well is we often, I feel like this is another book reference, but we often end up comparing our
Right.
chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 50, and we
Right,
have that reflect
exactly,
to how we're
exactly. We
feeling
think
about
I'm never
everything.
going to get to that chapter. Right. Right. So I mean, an early
Exactly.
age, I was always interested in writing. I remember trying to write before I could read. I would scribble because I wanted to express myself that way, and was very interested in creative writing. Wrote a lot of poetry. When I went to college, I majored in journalism because my mother said, "You should major in journalism. That way, you can get paid to write." Which which at the time in 1982.
Well, your mom had better advice for you than me then. My mom's like, you should get a
Right,
master's degree in history. That's really valuable. So I
right.
did, and nobody hired me.
I have friends with advanced degrees in history, so I know how you feel from here talking to them. And really at the time, it was, becoming a writer was kind of like, you know, getting ready to be on the verge of homelessness for the rest of your life. And I also was always interested in journalism. I remember when All the President's Men, when that book came out, and just being so inspired by Woodward and Bernstein. And Barbara Walters was a big idol of mine growing up. So I was like, okay, I'll try journalism. And I did. Got my degree in journalism. While I was in school, I worked part-time at the Washington Post as a news aide. And that was fascinating because I got to see the inner workings of a really top-notch newspaper and their team, and it was fascinating and fun and fulfilling. And then, as I got close to graduation, the chairman of my department called me into his office and said, "Hey, I've recommended you for a job, and it's with a New York Times best-selling author. And if he offers you the job as his research assistant and editorial assistant, you should leave the Post to take it." I was like, really? Because I was writing some
Wow.
freelance articles for the Post and getting paid pretty well and having fun. He's like, just go with an open mind. So I did. It turned out that the author was a man by the name of David Wise, who was at the time one of the world's top experts in espionage in the Cold War, and he'd written the very.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Oh, that stuff is wildly interesting to me. Like, I'm always like,
Oh,
I've read like Tom Clancy. I've dove in. I've dove.
yeah,
I've
yeah. So you would
dived
love his
deep into
stuff. I
that
mean,
stuff.
most of what he wrote was nonfiction. Um, and
Hmm.
we did 3 books in 3 years. The first was finishing up his spy thriller novel, his third thriller novel called The Samarkand Dimension. The second was revising a political science textbook that he co-authored that was the #1 selling intro to poli-sci textbook in the United States for decades. Um, and the third book started out as a New York Times Magazine cover piece. And this was the first time I was working with him on a book that started as just a seed of an idea. And that book ended up having the same
Mm.
title as the article, which is The Spy Who Got Away. about Edward Lee Howard, who had been slated to be the CIA lead in Moscow, uh, had been pulled and fired at the last
Wow.
minute before they sent him, became disgruntled, sold secrets to the Russians, outed spies that were working on, with the
Wow.
CIA, uh, at least one of which was executed for it. And and then
Oh,
fled.
that's wild. We've had Frank Figluzzi on the show, who used to
Oh,
be
okay.
in the FBI. I think he works for MSNBC now, but he worked under I forget the guy's name, but he was the
Yes,
guy that
yes,
was like a spy in the FBI for
yeah.
many years, and nobody had
Yeah,
any
actually,
idea.
David wrote a book about him too, but that was after I worked after I no longer
Oh,
worked with him.
interesting.
But yeah, so then Ed Howard escaped and fled to Moscow while he was under FBI surveillance. While they were watching, he literally like ducked out of
Wow.
his car using the tactics that the CIA taught him to evade surveillance, and fled to Moscow. And so after the article came out, he realized that there was so much there. He wanted to do a book. And so that's where I started to really get my education in traditional publishing and how it works, because he called his agent.
Mm.
His agent came down to DC. They met, talked about it. Then the agent sold, pitched the different publishers, ended up selling it to Random House. And this is back, this is when I still went to the library to do research. We didn't have an internet yet. And so the editor from Random House came down to DC on a few occasions and, worked on the book with David. And my job was to do research and help him organize stuff and keep things going. And he also had me do some editing. And it was fantastic. But the real reason I thought I was there was that after the 3 years and the 3 books in 3 years, his commitment to me was that he would get me a job as a newspaper reporter, which he did. And it was at a mid-sized paper in Central Florida. And it took me about a week.
When you say Central Florida, do you mean like
Area,
Orlando,
yeah, like
Ocala,
the
like
area,
where are
a
we
little more
talking?
coastal. I'd rather not say who, because I'm not going to say nice
Okay.
things.
Total, totally. No
But
worries at all.
it was not a good experience. It was very different than what I was used to at the Post, in terms of just the whole
Mm.
approach to news and to reporting, and the culture was really tough. It was weird. It was like going, it was by then it was like 1986, or yeah, and or 89, because I'd been with David for three
Sure.
years, and it felt like I went back into like 1956. Like the level of
Oh, wow.
racism that was there, and inequities, and it was just hard because I had been in DC in a very diverse kind of community, and it was just weird to be down there with literally where there was like one side of the tracks and the other side of the tracks, and the west side of the tracks away from
Wow.
the beach was where the lower income people of color lived, and a lot of times they didn't have electricity or even running water, even though the rest of the town did, and things like that. So
So it
yeah,
sounds like
so
you may not have hung
basically,
out here that long
and
then,
so
based on the
there you go.
experience.
So I really wanted, and I thought, oh, I'm done with this publishing stuff. I don't like this. I didn't like the job because the hours were
Mm.
terrible. I was making $300 a week, working 6 days a week, and I'd have to come in early to write my stories from the night before, and I'd be covering city council meetings till 10 at night. And it took over my whole life for like no money. And so I wanted out of
Sure.
publishing. I moved to Colorado because it wasn't Florida. And the guy I was with got into grad school out there. And I'm like, fine, Colorado. I go out there. And I didn't know what I was going to do. So, because I didn't want a newspaper, I got offered a job at the Rocky Mountain News, and I turned it down because they wanted me to do part-time night cops. And I was like, no.
Oh, that's tough. That's really tough. So don't sleep and write articles people
And
may
right,
not
and
read. That
just
doesn't sound like my idea of fun.
cover the like the just like the things that they report every night on the local news that you can't stand to watch, because it doesn't really add to anybody's life to know every little.
Yeah, I've kind of taken away from watching nighttime news because I'm in the New York
Right.
area, so I've kind of taken
It's
away from
just,
watching like nighttime news.
I know.
Something in your house could kill you. News at 11. Okay,
Exactly.
wow.
So
I'm
I just
excited to
wasn't into
watch the
that,
news.
and I turned down the Rocky Mountain News, which David was not too thrilled with me for that. But anyway, um, he got over it. But so I started waiting tables. I just was like, clean slate.
Mm.
And while I was doing that, I met a gentleman who wanted to be a personal fitness trainer, and he had showed me some before and after pictures, and he's like, yeah. And I said, oh my God, these are great results. Why don't you have clients? And he says, well, I don't know. Nobody's hiring me. And I said, I can get you clients. Well, 10 years later, we had built we'd gotten married and had two kids, and we had built a personal fitness training business. It was one of the first exclusively personal fitness training studios, definitely in the Denver metropolitan area, probably everywhere but California. And we did very well. And we went from, working out of like sneaking into the rec center and training clients, trying to look like we're not training clients, all the way to having our own commercial location in a really great area of Denver. And everything was turnkey. I had everything systematized, and it was just plug and play. And then I was like, wow, this has been fun. This is not my calling. And I wasn't sure what my calling was, but I knew it wasn't that. And that ended my marriage because, yeah, because he liked it with me running
Wow.
the business, and and so that was the
Well, that makes sense.
yeah.
It's
I mean,
if it's a
yeah.
drastic
I mean, it was
life
like
change like that, that
he
can cause a
liked
shift
that we
like
were
that.
focusing on, and I said, look, this is your dream. It's not my dream. It's ready to, all you have to do is keep running it. I'll be here to advise, but I need this space. And I got it.
Hmm.
So, and then I wasn't sure what to do, but I thought, well, maybe I could be a business coach for wellness professionals. And so I went to the University of Santa Monica, which has a spiritual psychology program. And it was there that I learned some very important skills that I use in my work today, like listening when someone's sharing something with you, not just for what they're saying, but what's underneath what they're saying, or what are they really trying to communicate with the words they're using,
Hmm.
because it's often different. And listening for those differences and learning
Yeah.
how to ask open-ended follow-up questions to help them excavate their true message and what they really are.
That's a really excellent point, by the way, because if you look at a lot of good interviewers, they could care less about the first question they ask. That's kind of the thing to tease out the question they really want to ask. Like the follow up question is actually the most
Exactly,
valuable part of a
exactly. And what
conversation.
I find so fulfilling is when asking a question actually helps my client understand their own work better and understand themselves better. And
Mm.
they often or communicate the value of what they're bringing better. So
Hmm.
I did that training 2 years. It was a master's program, so I completed that and got my master's degree thingy. And then I was going to be a business coach for wellness professionals, so I started to do that, and my clients actually got the one quick story I'm most proud of is a woman had an Anytime Fitness franchise. She was on the verge of bankruptcy. I worked with her for 3 months, and by the end of our time together, she was able to sell that franchise for $60,000 and did not declare bankruptcy. So that was cool.
Wow.
Um, and but an interesting thing started to happen. Some of my clients started to say, well, what I really want to do is write a book.
Ha.
There it is.
You
And that's
can't
what I
run
mean.
away
It was
from it.
like
There
this
it is.
river going this one direction. And then we just did this big U-ey, and just had this,
It's really interesting
right?
because like when you're meant to do something, it's not gonna leave you alone. It will
Yeah,
stalk you
yeah.
and stare in your
And
windows
so
at
I
night.
started to help a couple of people do that. And, one of them did a really great self-published book. Another one got a book deal with Wiley for her dating and relationships book. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot how fun this is. I love this. And during that time, I also got a part-time position as an acquisitions editor at a small independent publishing house in Colorado. And this is really, and this is, I'm going to stop my background story because this is really the last piece, is that I would get these
Sure.
proposals from people who clearly had wonderful value to share, and also just as clearly had no idea how to position it or how to communicate that value to a publisher. And because my job was to go through the
Hmm.
stack, my job was not to help them figure it out. I was unable to help them. And I realized that instead of being a business coach for wellness professionals, I needed to be a book coach for subject matter experts to help them position their work so that publishers could appreciate the value that they could share in a book. And that was, I'd already been coaching people for about 6 years before I really nailed that down. And so that was in 2009 that I made that revelation. But I'd already been a book coach for about 7 years. Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Robin, because one of the things I think that's really unique in your background is actually the journalism aspect, and I'm curious, how do you feel like your training and your work in journalism has affected how you look at a book? Like, has that
Incredibly
affected
so.
it
And
at all?
actually, this is the thing. And I mean, this is the thing my team's always telling me, like, you're the best at this. This is your zone of genius. I think that it's because as a journalist, you have to be able to hear the hook, right? So you're sitting in a 4 hour long city council meeting and you got to walk out of there and write a story. You have to train your ear for what in this is going to be interesting to my reader. Where does all the stuff that's happening in this
Hmm.
room have the most relevancy to the real life of my reader? And so I'd have to do that for every single thing I covered and just be listening for that hook. And that's what I'm doing when I'm helping a client come up with a clear saleable concept for their book, or even as we're writing. Sometimes I hear that little thing and I'm like, wait, what's that? And then that's a little vein of gold, I can tell. And I ask a few, those follow-up questions you were just talking about. And journalism teaches you
Hmm.
how to sniff that stuff out. And if you do it over and over and over again, day after day, you just learn how to spot those things.
It's really interesting because I know, like, for me, as I mentioned, my background's in history. So, like, when I'm looking at like telling a story or interviewing somebody, like, I've written extensively and stupidly long papers on Dante and things like that. So, like, when I'm telling someone's story, I look at it differently. So I think the viewpoint and how you have and how you look at a story is actually really valuable. And I think that's the thing a lot of people miss, is the right
Yeah, it
viewpoint
is,
when they're starting
because
out.
a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that, like, even the proposition of, have you thought about writing a book? Their first thought is that somebody's asking them to write a memoir, right? Or like a story of my life, and
Hmm.
and really that's,
Yes. And that's the book everybody wants to write, but I don't think it has a ton of value unless, like,
well, and
you
even
survived
then,
some major
probably other
tragedy or
people have
something.
survived a similar tragedy and already written a memoir. So it's a tough thing. And
Yeah.
what I often encourage people to do is say, what if this wasn't a memoir? What are some of the key, like, okay, you've been a very successful person. What are some of the key principles that you have utilized consistently over the years that made you successful, right? And
Yep.
or what is a theme in your life that you could maybe share some value with your ideal reader that could help them get more out of their life. And the beautiful thing about that is, when you do that, when you change that focus, and I've seen this happen with so many of my clients, they still get to tell all their favorite stories. Right.
It's just the right
Right, it's just,
viewpoint.
but you don't have to
It's
do
coming
it
into it
in
the
a
right
three
viewpoint.
arc, a 3 act arc where you have to have all this stuff going on in a narrative plot line, which is one of the more difficult models
Hmm.
of a book structure to execute, is a full length narrative.
I think that's one of the tough things for people to get over, though, because I think a lot of times, unless you're an A-list celebrity, like you may be a nice person, but people don't really care, right? Like it has to be positioned in the right way, like you're talking about of, teachable concepts. Because sure, you may have a great life story, but people don't know who you are. So that
Exactly.
relevance,
I have a great
affects
example. I
how you
had a
tell your
client,
story.
Tom Panaggio, great guy. He and his brother had co-founded a direct marketing company, and they went from like 0 to 35 million in 10 years. I mean, so very smart guy, terrific. They'd sold out. He
Wow.
wanted to do some consulting, for corporate and for startups as well. And so, he came to me, bless his heart, with 40,000 written words of his story of how he and his brother grew their business. And it was really boring. And and I looked it over, and we got on the phone, and I said, Tom, I have some bad news. And he's like, what? I said, you need to start over.
Wow.
And he was a good sport. He's like, okay, what do you propose? And I explained to him what you just said, right? It's cool. You've had an interesting life, but you're not, at the time, I think Lee Iacocca's book was really big. So I'm like, you're not Lee Iacocca, like, you're not the head of Chrysler or something. Nobody cares
Mm-hmm.
because they don't know who you are. So I started asking him questions. Tell me more about yourself, and what do you think made you successful? And uh, he started to tell me, what are your hobbies? He started to tell me his hobby was amateur race car driving. I'm like, well, that's
Oh, that's
interesting.
cool.
Right? And so we talk a little bit about that. And then he started talking. I said, well, what do you think of some of the things that made your business successful? And he goes, well, and he just like rattled off this one thing. And he said, well, risk and opportunity are soulmates. And I'm like, excuse me? And he said it again. And I'm like, yeah. I said, And now I'm thinking, so this guy's a risk taker, because amateur
Race
race
car driving.
was
Right.
not for the wimpy scaredy cats, right? So I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, the biggest boost that we had in our business was when we took like pretty big, calculated but big risks. I said, well, that's an interesting idea. While we're talking, I start searching Amazon for business and risk. And at this time, this is like 2013 or something, maybe even 2011. At this time, every book about business and risk was about how to avoid it.
Risk averse.
Yes, about how to protect your business from risks. And so I said to Tom, I said, what if you wrote a book about embracing risk in your business? And he loved it. And we ended up with the title, The Risk Advantage, Embracing the Entrepreneur's Unexpected Edge. And he used that book to, be able to do what he wanted to do next, which is he got some speaking gigs at some of the bigger Fortune 500 companies. And he also, worked with SBA and just coached young entrepreneurs. And, that's what he wanted to do with it. That's why he wanted to write it. And he was really proud of it. And, he's helping people with it. And he got to tell every story that he wanted to, but in a much more engaging and relevant way, a way that was relevant to the reader.
Well, Robin, let me ask you this, because I think that kind of raises a good point. Like, how important is a book for opening kind of that next phase of opportunity, right? Like, you mentioned, what he really wanted to do. And when I look at it, like for me, like the reason I wrote a book, 'cause it took me 5 years to get there, like wasn't because, oh my gosh, I need to write a book. Like I should just write a book. It was like, okay, so my brand is here, and I know that the right content told the right way is going to help my brand get here. So I guess where does that fit
Yeah.
in terms of the strategy of your next step?
Yeah, I think that you want to write a book that pulls you in the direction that you want to go next. So it shouldn't only be a chronicle of where you've been.
Mm-hmm.
Your concept should also align with where you're going, and acknowledging where you've been, but really about where you're going. And I think that the way you phrase the question also raises a very important point that people still kind of intellectually understand, but I don't think they really take seriously yet, which is that the value proposition of writing a book and getting it out in the world, and this is whether you self-publish or get a traditional book deal, the ROI of the entire process comes through, number one, that you become better at communicating the value. Like if you now this doesn't happen if you write a book in a weekend or you do the 90-day
Right.
sabbatical crap. This is when you're really doing an inquiry and
It kind of has a like a personal development value to yourself and actually putting it together.
exactly, exactly. I always say the book is the equivalent of like holding the diploma that says you're a PhD. But writing the book is the program
Yeah.
that made you
Yeah, absolutely.
worthy of it, right? The book is only evidence that you've had a transformation. It's not the transformation. And I think people who rush the book process are getting that confused. And so if you take the time, like there is no shame in taking 5 years to write your book. I mean, our clients would kill us if
Well, it
that.
took me 5 years to confront it, and then 2 years to actually write it. I wrote the first manuscript, and I'm like, "This is horseshit." So I
Mhm.
threw it out and wrote the second manuscript.
But it's better than taking the first one, slapping a cover on it, and calling it good, right?
Yeah, because it
Because
wasn't.
right, exactly, and it is a discovery process, and I also think people underestimate the value of getting the book into the right hands. It doesn't you
Yeah.
don't have to sell millions of copies for the book to change your life. If you get the book into some highly targeted, proper hands, you can change your life with your book,
Yes.
probably giving away 3 copies if you really wanted to. Now, and I think it's just about understanding what is the purpose for the book in your life and creating your book promotion plan accordingly. Don't feel like you have to sell tens of thousands of copies of your book if you're in a highly niched area of business where you only need 3 clients a year because they're going to give you $1 million a piece. Well, maybe, you know what? Maybe a bestseller isn't a big deal to you. Maybe it's
Right.
about really curating the right list and getting personal introductions and then tastefully, graciously giving one of your books to somebody who's highly qualified. So I really invite people, get your ego out of it. Forget
Yeah.
about all the bestseller status because right now almost the only one that really can't be hacked still is the New York Times. So that, it doesn't have as much meaning anyway. But it's about what role could the book play in your life, in your business, with your brand, and what activities are you already doing that you could do better with a book? And here's another great question to ask yourself is, and what activities do you know you should be doing that you might feel more motivated or they might feel easier to do with a book, like getting speaking gigs, like doing podcast interviews, right? When you have a book,
Well, like even I have friends that the honorarium they get for their speaking gigs has doubled, tripled, 3 times, from having a book that's well known.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So so I always say plan your book promotion strategy in connection and in conjunction with your business promotion strategy, because if you make it a separate thing, you will never promote your book because you won't have time, and unless you're
Yep.
like independently wealthy, you won't have the resources either. Yeah.
So, Robin, let me ask you this: is you've helped so many people put together books, and in fact, in the last 2 years, you have 100% success rate in helping people place their books with the right agents to go on and secure the deal.
Yeah.
What is the thing that when you're talking to clients kind of horrifies you that you have to get them to not do?
Oh, just one?
Well, there may be multiple, but what are those couple things that you look at and you're like, oh God, don't do that.
Yeah. One of them is like going to a trade show and putting a big pile of books on a table and with a sign that says take one.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah, because that really devalues the book and doesn't send the right message to your potential reader. And most people, even if they take one, they won't read it. So I think it's more important that people actually do invest something to have your book, or that it's given to them with a sense of honor and like a specialness. I think that Oh, here's my big cringer though. This one really gets me. Well, a book is just a big business card.
Oh, I hate that one.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay. Uh, and anytime someone says that, I have a very standard follow up, which is, and can I just ask you something? And they're like, yeah. And I said, how many business cards have you taken to bed?
Yeah, that might be an awkward experience. I can't think of, all the business cards I've ever collected going to my bed. That's just kind of weird.
Right? Yeah. And now, how many books are by your bedside right now?
Well, I think a good book's like a good album, right? Like you listen to an album and you either feel different at the end, you feel like you went someplace, you feel like you experienced something, and I think a good book is that. It's a transformative thing.
Well, yeah. So most people, when I ask them how many books are by their bedside, say anywhere from 1 to 10, and they will also add, there's always a book at their bedside, right? They just rotates different books, and why is that? It's because the act of if you're reading a well-written book, you should be. So if you're an author, your goal is to really should be to utilize this opportunity to create intimacy with your reader. If you think about a business card and the nature of a business card is all about you. Your business card is all
Hmm.
about you.
It's very impersonal too.
Right. It's very impersonal. It's very superficial, and it's not even getting it. It can't possibly even get into the real wisdom that you have to offer. Now, a book done well not only accomplishes all of that, but it's a portal to intimacy. And we know that because of where people read their books, in their
Hmm.
most intimate spaces. And you also have probably had the experience where you've read a book and you feel like you know the author in some way.
Yeah, I don't know if you know who Chuck Klosterman is. He writes a lot of books on like music and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like his books, like I feel like I know Chuck Klosterman, but I don't know him. But like
Right.
I feel like that through his books.
And I'm also going to bet that you feel somehow, in some mysterious way, that he sees you,
Yeah, I would agree.
right?
I would agree. I would
And
definitely
so
agree.
this is really important when you're writing to your reader, is write to a reader. Do not write to readers, because writing to the readers is like talking at them. It's like
Hmm.
you're on stage and they're in there listening. And then exactly what happens is the same thing that happens when someone's watching someone on stage, especially when they're talking about themselves. They start doing other things. They start fidgeting and they lose interest and they get distracted. But if they feel like that person is speaking directly to them about them, then they're interested and they feel connected and they feel seen. Now,
Mm.
think about this for a second. Think about what Pepsi spends for a 30-second ad during the Super Bowl. You're going to spend like $33 million or something crazy like that just for 30 seconds to flash their logo in a Super Bowl ad.
And
Okay.
then I get to the end of the commercial and I don't quite know what they're selling, but we got there.
Right? Maybe we knew it was Pepsi. Maybe we never find out what the brand was for the Super Bowl ad. But the point is, they will never have that kind of access to the heart and mind of your
Hmm.
client that you do. That the gift that that person is giving you 6 hours of their undivided attention in bed, I might add.
Hmm.
Honor it. Make it worth it. Right? Give them a great experience. Make sure that they feel that that was time well spent and that they are richer for it. And I'm telling you, that person will tell other people about you.
That's what I was gonna say. Like for me, the books I've really connected with, like I think of David Novak's book, "Taking People with You," or "So Good They Can't Ignore You" by Cal Newport. Like those are books I've become an advocate for because I've had a personal connection with them.
Yeah, exactly. And then you tell your friends about them. And also, like this has happened to me and it's happened to several of my clients. People will read your book and reach out to you on your website or call or whatever. And they'll say, hey, I read your book. I really need to work with you. What's it
Hmm.
going to take? Well, is that like every consultant's dream? Like, isn't that the conversation we all want to have all day long? You know? And so,
Absolutely.
but if you don't treat them with the respect and understanding that, you know, if you're not willing to spend a little extra time, and I'm just talking like a few extra months, right? Just to really excavate your insight and use the book writing process as an opportunity not only to inform your reader, but to learn more about yourself and to learn more about your work and find better ways of communicating the value, then it literally will, if it doesn't 10x your business within the first 3 years, then something went wrong.
Well, Robin, this has been an awesome conversation. We went a lot of directions I did not expect to go, and I feel like this conversation is better for it. So for people listening, if they want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about what you're doing, where's going to be the best place for our listeners to go?
For the first time ever, I actually have my book with me for a podcast interview. So I'm going to flash my
Oh,
book,
awesome. There we go.
book that sells you, because you're the first one. I always forget to hold it up because the shoe cobbler has no shoes, right? So I write a book that sells you, increase your credibility, income, and impact on Amazon. But if you want to find me directly, it's robincolucci.com. Uh, I also have a podcast, The Author's Corner, where we talk with authors and people who help authors. And so if you're an aspiring author, it's chock full of great advice. And yeah, that's probably those are the best ways.
Awesome. Well, Robin Colucci, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.